The wet asphalt shone like black glass under the streetlights, and every step Lena Hart took made a quiet, sticky sound, sole peeling from pavement, then settling again, like the road itself didn't want to let her go. Her cardboard box was heavier than it should have been. Not because of what was inside. Just a few framed photos, a half-dead desk plant, a mug with a chipped handle, and the thin folder that held the only certificates she'd ever been proud to hang on a wall. But because of what it meant. Fired. Not reassigned. Not let go gently. Fired publicly with the kind of precision that makes humiliation feel deliberate. A gust of wind pushed her ponytail across her cheek and tugged at the sleeves of her gray cardigan. She tightened her grip on the box and kept walking. Behind her, the downtown hospital's tall glass facade reflected the city like a cold mirror, an immense structure full of lights and movement, indifferent to one person's quiet collapse. She didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the sidewalk ahead, on the puddles collecting in cracks, on the bright red, "Don't walk," hand that blinked at her like a warning from something larger than traffic. And then she heard it. A low, growing thump. At first it blended with the city, the distant rumble of trucks, the steady whoosh of tires, but it rose into something different, a beat with weight, a pulse that made the air feel thicker. Helicopter rotors. Lena stopped under a street lamp and looked up. The sound wasn't passing over, it was coming down. Her stomach tightened, not with fear exactly, but with a reflex she hadn't used in years. The same reflex that used to make her count seconds, scan for exits, and listen for the slightest change in pitch. A second later, a second set of rotors joined the first. 2 helicopters. The noise doubled, the air shuddering with it. Windows trembled. Loose trash danced across the street. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped once and went silent as if it had second thoughts. People appeared like a tide, heads popping out of doorways, pedestrians slowing mid-stride, phones lifting. Lena didn't lift her phone. She turned slowly, following the sound toward the open stretch of land beyond the hospital's outpatient building, an emergency access field that was usually empty except for a few service vehicles and the occasional ambulance staging during overflow. Tonight it was lit by floodlights that hadn't been on when she left. And there, through the rain, mist, and rotor wash, she saw them. 2 helicopters descending in synchronized arcs, lights blinking, skids lowering, the kind of coordinated landing you didn't see for ordinary patients. Not here, not ever. The first helicopter touched down and threw a spray of water outward like a breaking wave. The second hovered a fraction longer, then landed beside it, perfectly aligned. The air smelled like hot fuel and wet concrete. And Lena's hands, still gripping her cardboard box, went numb. She didn't know why. She only knew that something impossible was happening in the same place she'd just been escorted out of like a nuisance. Then she saw the figures moving in the harsh light. Dark uniforms, helmets, med bags, a stretcher. And she heard someone shout over the rotors, voice muffled but urgent. "We need an internal medicine consult now, no delays." Lena's throat tightened, because she recognized that tone. Not panic. Command. And even though she was standing in the rain with a box of her life in her arms, even though she'd been told she was a liability and not a cultural fit, she felt the old part of her, quiet, trained, unignorable, step forward inside her like a key turning in a lock. She took one step toward the field, then another. Someone near her muttered, "What the heck is going on?" A woman in a blazer whispered, "That's federal, that has to be federal." Lena didn't answer them, because in the light spilling from those helicopters, she saw something else. A face, briefly visible through the open door of the first aircraft. Pale, sweat-sheened, jaw clenched hard. A man in his 50s, strapped to a medical litter, oxygen mask pressed tight. And even from this distance, even with the rain and noise, Lena recognized him. Not personally, but professionally. And if she was right, this wasn't just a landing. This was an intervention. And whatever had got her fired an hour ago was about to become very small compared to what was coming down from the sky. Pause. Lena Hart had always been the kind of person people underestimated. Part of it was her size, 5'4", slim, shoulders slightly hunched as if she'd learned early that taking up space made you a target. Part of it was her voice, calm and even, never rising to compete in a room full of louder personalities. And part of it, if she was honest, was that she'd allowed it. After leaving the military, she'd promised herself she would build a quieter life. A normal life. A life where she could walk through grocery stores without scanning faces, where she could sit in a cafe with her back to a window and not feel a need to track every entrance. So when she'd gotten hired at Lakebridge Medical Center in Seattle, one of those gleaming, high-volume hospitals where the lobby looked like a hotel and the executives spoke in branding language, she'd kept her head down. She didn't advertise her past. Her resume said what it needed to say. Physician assistant, internal medicine track, high-acuity experience, certifications, leadership training. Nothing about where the high acuity came from. Nothing about the places with dust instead of rain, where medicine happened under canvas and the stakes were measured in minutes. Nothing about the fact that before she ever wore a Lakebridge badge, she'd been a special operations combat medic, attached to teams that didn't exist on paper. She'd learned quickly that civilians loved the idea of heroes, but they didn't always love the actual people who'd done hard things. Hard people made them uncomfortable. Hard people asked questions. Hard people didn't laugh at the right jokes. So Lena let herself be the new PA. The quiet one. The one who worked too much and talked too little. She didn't mind, she was good at the work, and she liked patience, actual patience, not metrics. Lakebridge's culture, though, had its own oxygen. It thrived on hierarchy. On who had the nicest coat, who got invited to the board dinners, who had the right school on their wall, who could say patient satisfaction with a straight face after cutting staffing. And at the center of that ecosystem, sharply dressed, smoothly spoken, always surrounded by an invisible bubble of influence, was Darren Pike. Darren wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a nurse, he wasn't even a clinician. He was an operations director, one of the hospital's rising administrative stars. The kind of man who could talk for 10 minutes and say nothing measurable, but somehow leave the room with everyone nodding. He controlled budgets, staffing approvals, scheduling. And in subtle ways, he controlled careers. The first time Lena met him, he'd smiled like they were colleagues and then looked down at her badge like it was an item on a receipt. Physician assistant, he'd said, tone polite but edged. We're trying to elevate standards across departments. I hope you'll align with the culture here. Lena had simply nodded. Of course. Darren's smile had sharpened. Good, we like team players. After that, the micro-humiliations began. The scheduled changes that always seemed to land on her, extra nights, back-to-back shifts. The meeting invites she didn't receive until after decisions were made. The way some nurses were told, quietly, that Lena was temporary, or not really one of us. Even the small things, her locker mysteriously reassigned, her name misspelled on internal documents, her access to certain charting tools delayed due to it. None of it was big enough to file a complaint about. That was the genius of it. It was death by paper cuts. And Lena, stubbornly focused on her patients, took it. Until the day everything snapped. It started with a patient named Mr. Howell, a retired bus driver with a warm smile and a history of heart failure who came in short of breath. Lena had been assigned to him because his case looked routine. But routine cases were where you either paid attention or you didn't. She paid attention. She noticed his breathing wasn't just labored. It was asymmetrical, slightly faster on one side, and his skin had that subtle gray undertone that didn't match his vitals. She ordered imaging. She pushed for a stat consult. And when the results came back, she felt the cold certainty settle in. He wasn't just fluid overloaded. He had a rapidly developing condition that needed immediate intervention. She moved fast, calm, direct, efficient. She coordinated a response, got the right people in the room, and stabilized him before his trajectory could turn fatal. It was the kind of save no one clapped for because it was invisible. Except one person saw it. A young resident named Priya Desai, fresh out of training, who watched Lena work with a kind of stunned admiration. Afterward, Priya had whispered, "How did you know? No one else saw that coming." Lena had just said, "You learn patterns." But the truth was, you learned them when the cost of missing them wasn't a write-up. It was a body bag. That day, Mr. Howell lived. And for a brief moment, Lena thought maybe, just maybe, this place would see her value. Instead, Darren Pike saw something else. A problem. Because when Lena escalated Mr. Howell's case, it triggered a cascade. Resource allocation, ICU bed usage, a cancellation of a scheduled VIP elective procedure due to staffing. And Darren cared about VIP procedures the way some people cared about oxygen. The next morning, Lena was called to a conference room with glass walls. Everyone could see in. Darren was there, along with a department manager named Elise Monroe, who wore sympathy like perfume, something you could apply without ever feeling it. Darren had folded his hands. "We need to discuss yesterday's incident." Lena's jaw tightened. "Incident? You created unnecessary disruption," Elise said gently. "There are protocols." "I followed protocols," Lena replied, "and the patient needed urgent intervention." Darren leaned forward slightly. "The patient is stable, that's good, but you escalated without proper chain of command approval." Lena stared at him. If I had waited, he could have crashed. Darren's expression stayed smooth. "That's speculative." And that's when Lena felt the moral outrage rise. Not loud, not explosive, but clean and bright like a blade. Speculative. A man's life dismissed as a hypothetical inconvenience. She chose her words carefully. "My job is to prevent crashes, not to make administration comfortable." The silence that followed was sharp enough to hear. Elise's eyes flicked to Darren. Darren's smile thinned. "I'm hearing," he said, "that you struggle with alignment and that you're combative." "I'm not combative," Lena said. "I'm clinical." Darren nodded slowly as if she'd confirmed something. "We've received feedback about your tone, about your fit with team culture." Lena realized then that this wasn't about Mr. Howell. This was about control. She stood, hands flat on the table. "If you're going to discipline me for doing the right thing, say it plainly." Darren held her gaze. "We're terminating your contract effective immediately." The words didn't land like thunder. They landed like ice. Lena felt her pulse slow, an old survival response. Her mind became painfully clear. Elise slid a folder toward her. "We'll need your badge. Security will escort you out." "Security," Lena repeated softly, tasting the humiliation. Darren's voice stayed level. "This is standard." And as Lena walked out through the glass-walled corridor, people looked up from computers, from break-room coffee, from charting. They saw her. They saw security behind her. And no one asked why. Because this hospital, like so many, had trained its people not to challenge the narrative when it was delivered with authority. Outside, rain had started, light at first, then steady. Lena had packed her box. She walked past the emergency entrance, past the ambulance bay, past the same floodlight field that was now occupied by 2 helicopters. And she had tried to convince herself to just go home. But home felt far away. And standing there now, watching the dark uniformed figures move around a stretcher, Lena realized the universe had other plans. Because the helicopters weren't here for Darren Pike. They weren't here for branding. They were here because someone important was bleeding time. And Lena's hands, numb on the cardboard edges, were suddenly steady. There were breadcrumbs Darren never bothered to pick up. The scar along Lena's forearm that looked like a clean, surgical line. The way she never flinched at alarms. The way she spoke in short, exact phrases under stress. The way she knew, without checking a map, the fastest route between triage and imaging. Once in the break room, someone had joked, "Lena, you move like you're still in the army." Lena had smiled faintly, old habit. But she'd never corrected them. Because she hadn't been still in the army. She'd been trained by people who didn't use the word habit. They used survival. And tonight, survival was landing in her old workplace on 2 sets of skids. Pause. If you're the kind of listener who loves that moment when the powerless person is forced to reveal they were never powerless at all, stay with this story right here. And if you want more fictional, justice-driven narratives like this, Take a second to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Lena crossed the street with the pedestrian light, moving into the wind thrown off by the rotor wash. The rain hit her face sideways, cold and sharp. A security guard near the outpatient entrance held up a hand. "Ma'am, you can't go over there." Lena slowed, careful. "I'm staff." The guard's eyes dropped to her empty lanyard. "Not anymore." His tone wasn't cruel, just procedural. And in that simple sentence, the injustice flared again. Not anymore. She adjusted her grip on the box. "I'm a clinician." "Ma'am," he repeated, firmer. Behind him, the scene on the field intensified. A team in dark flight suits clustered around the stretcher. A portable monitor beeped in an urgent rhythm. Someone shouted, "BP's dropping." The words snapped Lena's attention like a wire. Dropping blood pressure meant one thing in her mind: a system failing under load. She stepped closer, voice raised just enough to cut through noise. "What's the patient's situation?" The guard opened his mouth to block. "K her again," but a different voice answered from behind the guard. "Who are you?" Lena turned. A woman in a Navy uniform, hair in a tight bun under a rain hood, stood with a medical pack strapped across her chest. Her posture was pure command, shoulders back, feet planted, eyes that didn't wander. "Military. Or federal?" Her gaze flicked over Lena, clothes wet, arms full of a cardboard box, then narrowed with confusion. Lena met her eyes. "Lena Hart, PA, Internal Medicine. I worked here until about an hour ago." The woman's eyes sharpened further at that. "You were fired." "Yes." No explanation, no defense. Just truth. The woman looked past her toward the hospital doors, then back at Lena. "Can you help?" Lena didn't hesitate. "Yes." The answer came from a place deeper than pride, deeper than anger. It was a vow. The woman turned and barked orders to her team. "Get her in, now." The guard sputtered, "She's not." "Do you want to argue policy or keep him alive?" The woman snapped, and the guard stepped back as if he'd been physically pushed. Lena moved onto the field, the floodlights washing her in stark white. Rotor blades still spun above, the wind pushing her cardigan flat against her body. She set the box down on a dry patch near a service vehicle without even thinking about it. Her life could wait. A man near the stretcher looked up, eyes wild with focus. He wore a flight medic patch. "We've got hypotension, altered mental status, possible internal bleed. Transport time was longer than expected." "Name?" Lena asked. The medic hesitated. "We can't." A suited man stepped forward, soaked but composed, an earpiece visible. "This is Director Malcolm Rourke." Lena's breath caught, but only for a fraction of a second. She knew that name. Most people did, whether they realized it or not. Malcolm Rourke wasn't a celebrity. He was something more dangerous, a man with quiet power, a senior federal official whose decisions moved money, policy, and careers, a man who rarely appeared in public because his work didn't require applause. And right now he was strapped to a stretcher, his face pale, his lips pressed tight as if he refused to show weakness. Lena leaned in close, voice calm. "Director Rourke, I'm Lena. I'm going to help you, okay?" His eyes focused on hers. Even through pain, they were sharp. "Who authorized?" he started, then his voice thinned as he inhaled through the oxygen mask. The Navy uniformed woman leaned in. "Ma'am, Hart, he's got a known clotting condition. He collapsed at a private briefing. We had to move." Lena's brain ran through possibilities at high speed, but her hands stayed steady. "Vitals." "Pressure 80/40, the flight medic said. "HR 130, O292 on mask." Lena nodded once. "He needs rapid evaluation. We're going inside, straight to a monitored bay. We need blood work, imaging, and an internal medicine attending. Now." The suited man bristled. "We have a team en route." Lena cut him off, not rude, just firm. "En route is not here. We work with what we have." The Navy uniformed woman watched her with a look that was half suspicion, half relief. "Get the stretcher moving," Lena said. "On my count, 1, 2, 3. They moved, wheels hitting wet ground, then rolling faster toward the emergency entrance. Inside the hospital, the smell changed immediately. Sterile air, antiseptic warm vents, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights. A nurse at the desk looked up. What is? Lena didn't slow. Critical incoming, get a bay ready. Call internal medicine and CT. Tell them it's federal transport, unstable vitals. The nurse blinked, then scrambled. People moved out of the way instinctively, as if the urgency had its own gravity. Lena felt something in her chest tighten, not fear, but the bitter awareness of irony. An hour ago, she'd been escorted out like a problem. Now she was leading a high-level emergency response through the same corridor. And the hospital, this institution that had treated her as disposable, was reacting to the real currency it respected: authority. They reached a monitored bay. Lena took over the room with calm precision. 2 large-bore IVs, she said. Type and screen. CBC, CMP, coag panel, EKG. Prepare fluids but don't flood him. We need to understand why he's dropping. A young nurse hesitated. Who are you? Lena met her eyes. The person keeping him alive until your attending gets here. The nurse swallowed and moved. The navy-uniformed woman stepped close. You're very comfortable with this. Lena's eyes stayed on the patient. Comfort doesn't matter, competence does. Rourke's eyes flicked toward Lena again. And that's when she noticed something subtle. The way his left side moved less when he breathed. The way his hand, gripping the blanket, trembled in controlled rhythm. Pain control masking something deeper. Lena pressed gently along his abdomen, watching his face more than her hands. Rourke. He tensed sharply when she touched a specific spot. There. Lena's mind snapped into a clear picture. Possible internal bleeding. Could be splenic, could be retroperitoneal. We need imaging now. The suited man stepped into the bay, voice tense. We can't risk exposure. We need a secure route. Lena looked up, eyes cool. Then secure it, but he goes now. A doctor finally rushed in. An attending from internal medicine, Dr. Kevin Huang, hair damp from rain, eyes wide as he took in the scene. He recognized the patient instantly, his face drained of color. Oh my, he started. Lena didn't let him freeze. Dr. Huang, hypotension, tachy, suspected internal bleed. We need CT immediately. Huang blinked at her, then nodded. Yes, CT, call radiology. He turned to the nurses, voice suddenly loud. As the room erupted into coordinated motion, Darren Pike appeared at the doorway. Of course he did. He was dressed in a tailored suit, dry somehow, as if he hadn't been outside in the rain at all. His eyes swept the room, calculating, already framing this as a narrative he could control. Then his gaze landed on Lena. For a full second, his expression didn't change. Then it did, just slightly. Shock like a crack in glass. He stepped forward, voice sharp. What is she doing here? The room's motion didn't stop, but the question cut like a knife. Lena didn't look at him. Working. She was terminated, Darren said loudly, as if volume could erase reality. Security, remove her. The navy-uniformed woman turned, eyes cold. Try. Darren froze, taken aback. He looked between them. This is a hospital, we have protocols. Lena finally turned to face him. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Your protocols fired me for saving a patient yesterday. Tonight, your protocols can wait. Darren's face tightened. You are out of your depth. Lena didn't raise her voice. Then watch. And in that moment, with Director Rourke's monitor beeping faster, with Dr. Huang barking orders, with federal security tightening around the bay, the social hierarchy Darren had built inside this hospital started to wobble. Not because Lena demanded respect, but because reality didn't care about titles. Reality cared about who could keep a human being alive. Pause. If you're feeling that pressure building, like you can sense the moment coming where everything flips, go ahead and tap like right now. It tells me you want more stories where quiet competence meets loud injustice, and it helps this one reach people who need that kind of catharsis. They moved Rourke down the hallway toward CT with a security detail clearing the route. Hospital staff pressed against walls, whispering. Is that? No way. Why are there soldiers? Lena walked beside the stretcher, one hand on the rail, eyes on the patient's face. Rourke's breathing was shallow now, sweat collecting at his hairline. Stay with me, Lena said quietly. His eyes opened a little wider. He looked at her like he was trying to place her not as a clinician, but as a presence. Like he'd met her before in a different kind of room. CT doors opened, the room bright and cold. Lena gave a rapid, efficient handoff to radiology, then turned to Dr. Huang. Given clotting condition, we need to consider anticoagulant complications, Lena said. Huang nodded, voice tense. I know, he's on. The Navy-uniformed woman stepped closer. We don't disclose meds. Lena looked at her. Then he dies with secrets, or you tell us and we treat him. The woman held Lena's gaze, then made a decision. He was on a blood thinner. He took it this morning. Lena nodded. Okay, that changes the urgency. The scan began, the machine hummed, the screen filled with grayscale slices. Radiology techs moved quickly, and within minutes a radiologist, a man with silver hair and a look of permanent fatigue, stepped in, eyes scanning the images. His face tightened. There's bleeding, he said, voice low. Significant retroperitoneal. Huang swore under his breath. Lena's mind moved ahead. He needs surgical consult, vascular, possibly interventional radiology for embolization. The suited man stepped forward. We will fly him to a secure facility. Huang shook his head. He might not survive transport. The Navy-uniformed woman's jaw worked as she processed that. Lena stepped closer, voice calm and unyielding. Right now, the safest facility is the one that can stop the bleeding fastest. That's here if we move. The radiologist nodded. We can call IR immediately. Huang was already pulling out his phone. And then Darren Pike reappeared, like a bad smell that followed. He'd clearly been running, because his tie was loosened now, and his expression was more brittle. This is a security nightmare, Darren insisted. We can't have an unauthorized former employee directing care for. The Navy-uniformed woman cut him off. She's not unauthorized, I authorized her. Darren's eyes wide. Deaned on what basis? The woman's tone sharpened. On the basis that she's the only person in this building who hasn't wasted a single second tonight trying to protect her ego. For a moment, Darren looked like he might explode. Then he did what people like Darren always did. He pivoted. He turned his anger into policy. He looked at Dr. Huang. Doctor, as operations director, I need you to understand this hospital is not equipped for. Huang looked at him with a strange new expression, like he was seeing Darren for the first time. Darren, Huang said slowly, get out of my way. Darren blinked. Excuse me. This man is actively bleeding internally, Huang continued, voice steady but tight. If you want to talk about optics, talk to me after he's stable. Until then, you are a distraction. The words hit the room like a slap. And that's when the room changed. You could feel it, the shift in who people were watching. Not Darren. Not the suits. Not the badges. Lena. The quiet PA who'd been fired. The one standing calmly at the center of a federal-level emergency. Darren's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then he stepped back, because for the first time in his career at Lakebridge, his authority didn't work. IR was called, vascular surgery was called, blood products were prepped. And in the middle of it all, Lena leaned close to Rourke. You're going to feel busy people around you, she said softly. That's good, it means we're moving. His eyes met hers, and his voice, though thin, carried a strange weight. You're not Lakebridge, he whispered. Lena's lips pressed together. No, sir. Rourke studied her face. Where did you learn to talk like that? Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Not yet. Pause. By the time they wheeled Director Rourke toward interventional radiology, the hospital felt like it had split into two worlds. One world was clinical, bright, fast, focused, driven by physiology and protocols that actually mattered. The other world was social. Whispering clusters, nervous glances, administrators with phones pressed to their ears, reputations trying to outrun consequences. Lena stayed in the clinical world. That was where she'd always lived best. She stood at the threshold of the IR suite while the team prepped inside. Federal security tightened their formation. A nurse handed Lena gloves automatically, as if she belonged. She took them without comment. Dr. Huang approached her, lowering his voice. Lena, why are you here? Darren said you were terminated. I was, Lena said simply. Huang's brow furrowed. For what? Lena's eyes stayed on the doors. For doing my job. Huang exhaled slowly, anger flickering. This is insane. Lena didn't respond because she'd learned something in hard places. Outrage had its moment, but it couldn't be allowed to take the wheel. Inside the suite, a surgeon in lead apron leaned over the monitor. We can access through femoral attempt embolization. The radiologist nodded. We need stability, pressure's still soft. Huang checked his phone. Blood is coming. The Navy-uniformed woman stepped beside Lena. You didn't ask who I was. Lena glanced at her. I don't need your name to work. A flicker of something, approval, passed through the woman's eyes. Captain Morgan Sloan, she said anyway. Medical liaison. Lena nodded once. Lena Hart. Sloan leaned closer, voice low enough only Lena could hear. Your file doesn't match what I'm seeing. Lena's expression didn't change. That's been a theme. Sloan's gaze sharpened. You were trained somewhere else. Lena didn't deny it. Yes. Where? Lena's jaw tightened slightly. Not here. Sloan studied her, then nodded slowly. Fair. A commotion erupted down the corridor. Quick footsteps, voices, the clack of dress shoes. Elise Monroe appeared with 2 HR staffers and a security supervisor. They looked like they'd dressed for a board meeting and sprinted through a storm. Elise's smile was strained. Lena, we need to speak with you. Lena didn't move. I'm in the middle of patient care. Elise's eyes flicked toward the IR doors, then back. Technically, you're not credentialed anymore. Sloan stepped forward, voice ice. Technically, you're obstructing urgent care for a federal director. Elise faltered. I'm not obstructing. You're trying to remove the clinician who identified the problem and coordinated the response, Sloan said. If he dies, I will personally ensure your name is included in every investigative document. Elise's face lost color. Behind her, Darren Pike appeared again, as if he'd been summoned by the word investigative. His expression was controlled, but Lena could see the strain around his eyes. He approached with the confidence of a man who believed he could still talk his way out of anything. Captain, Darren said smoothly, Lakebridge appreciates your involvement, but our policies. Sloan didn't even look at him. Your policies are irrelevant. Darren's smile tightened. That's not how hospitals work. Lena finally looked at him fully. And for the first time, she saw not a villain, but a frightened man clinging to the only tool he'd ever had. The ability to define the room. Darren, Lena said quietly, if you want control, go find a spreadsheet. His eyes flashed. You're insolent. Lena nodded once. Yes. The simplicity of it disarmed him. A nurse rushed out of the IR suite. We need someone to confirm med history. The director's wife is on the phone, but she's panicking. He won't answer questions. Sloan turned instantly. I'll handle. Lena stepped forward. I'll do it. Sloan hesitated. He's high profile. Lena's voice stayed calm. So is death. She took the phone, walked a few steps away to a quieter corner and put it to her ear. A woman's voice came through, shaking. Is he alive? Oh God, is he alive? He's alive, Lena said, tone steady. My name is Lena. I'm part of the medical team with him right now. I need you to answer a few questions so we can treat him safely. Asab, who are you? I'm a clinician, Lena said. I'm going to stay calm for both of us, okay? Tell me what blood thinner he's on and when he last took it. The woman inhaled raggedly. Warfarin, this morning, he said he felt fine. Any recent falls, any trauma? No, he's been stressed. He doesn't sleep. He won't slow down. Lena's eyes closed briefly. Okay, thank you. We're doing everything we can. The woman's voice broke. Please, he's all we have. Lena swallowed, emotion touching the edge of her voice but not crossing it. We're not letting him go. She handed the phone back to the nurse, then returned to the doors. Sloan watched her, something like respect settling in. Inside the IR suite, the team worked with meticulous speed. Lena could hear fragments. Contrast. Pressure. Hold. A long minute passed, then another. Outside, Darren Pike stood with Elise and HR, his face rigid. He couldn't stop what was happening, but he could still plan his narrative. Lena could almost see it forming in his head. Unauthorized clinician interferes, hospital risk, we acted to protect. Then the IR doors opened, and the radiologist stepped out, pulling off his gloves. He looked tired, but his eyes held relief. "We got it," he said. "We stopped the bleed, he's stabilizing." A wave of exhalations moved through the corridor like a breeze. Sloane's shoulders loosened. Dr. Huang closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with renewed focus. "We need ICU bed, now." The nurse nodded and ran. Darren Pike's face shifted immediately, relief mixed with calculation. A crisis averted meant he could now turn the moment into a press release. But Lena wasn't thinking about press releases. She was thinking about the patient, and about the fact that she'd just saved the life of a man important enough to arrive by 2 helicopters. A man whose survival would bring questions. Questions that would not be contained inside a glass-walled conference room. Pause. If you're already imagining how Darren Pike is going to try to rewrite this night, I want you to drop a comment with one word. Receipts. Because the only thing stronger than arrogance is evidence, and in stories like this, evidence is where justice lives. They moved Director Rourke to the ICU under heavy security, the hospital corridors clearing like a tide pulling back. Lena walked behind the stretcher now, her role shifting from leader to support, because the immediate crisis had moved into a different phase. Monitoring, stabilization, careful follow-through. That was fine. She didn't need the spotlight. But the spotlight was coming anyway. In the ICU, the charge nurse looked up sharply when she saw the security detail. "We don't." Sloane stepped in. "You do tonight." The charge nurse's eyes widened. Then she nodded and began directing staff. Dr. Huang turned to Lena at the ICU desk. "Stay, I want you here." Lena hesitated. "I'm not credentialed." Huang's voice hardened. "I'll take responsibility." Darren Pike appeared at the ICU entrance, as if he'd been summoned by those words. "I'm sorry," Darren said, voice smooth again, "but that's not possible." Huang turned on him. "Kevin," Darren corrected automatically like a reflex. "Let S be rational, we can't have a terminated employee." "She's the reason he's alive," Huang snapped. Darren's expression tightened. "We have a full ICU team." "And you fired her," Huang said, voice low now, dangerous. "For saving a patient yesterday. I'm starting to think you don't understand what a hospital is." Darren's cheeks flushed. He glanced around, aware of eyes on him, nurses, residents, techs, all watching. He forced a smile. "We'll discuss this privately." "No," Huang said. "We'll discuss it publicly. Later, right now, step away." Darren looked like he'd been struck. He backed up half a cent. "Ep." And that's when the ICU doors opened again, and a new figure entered. He was older, gray hair, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive but not flashy. His posture was straight, his face composed. He didn't have to raise his voice to change the room. People moved instinctively. Sloane snapped to attention. "Sir," she said. The man nodded once, then looked at Lena. His eyes held recognition, not personal warmth, but the recognition of someone who had read a file and now saw the person attached to it. "Lena Hart," he said. Lena's pulse didn't spike, but something inside her tightened. "Yes." He extended a hand. "Admiral Thomas Keene." The title landed quietly but heavily. Admiral. Not a hospital board member, not a regional director. A senior military authority. Darren Pike's mouth opened slightly, and he shut it again. Keene didn't look at Darren. He didn't look at Elise. He looked at Lena like she was the only stable object in a room of shifting sand. "Thank you," Keene said simply. Lena's voice stayed even. "I did my job." Keene nodded as if that was the only answer he would accept. Then he glanced toward the ICU room where Rourke lay behind glass, monitored, stable. "Director Rourke will live," Keene said, more statement than question. Huang nodded. "He's stabilized, we'll monitor closely." Keene turned his gaze back to Lena. "You were fired." Darren Pike finally found his voice. "Admiral, as operations director, I can explain. There were." Keene raised a hand, not dramatic, just final. Darren stopped mid-sentence. Keene's eyes stayed on Lena. I'd like to hear your explanation. Lena could feel every pair of eyes in the ICU corridor pivot to her. This wasn't a courtroom, but it was becoming one. Lena inhaled slowly. Yesterday, I escalated care for a patient I believed was at immediate risk. The patient was stabilized. The escalation impacted scheduling and resource allocation. Operations deemed it disruptive. I was terminated. Keene's expression didn't change. He turned his head slightly, looking at Dr. Huang. Was she clinically correct? Huang didn't hesitate. Yes, if she hadn't escalated, the patient could have crashed. She caught it early. Keene nodded once. Then finally, he looked at Darren Pike. It wasn't anger. It was assessment. The way you look at a structural flaw in a bridge. Mr. Pike, Keene said calmly, I'd like to see the termination documentation. Darren straightened, clinging to procedure. Of course, HR can provide. Now, Keene said. Not louder. Just absolute. Elise Monroe scrambled. Yes, Admiral, we'll get it. As Elise rushed away, Keene looked back to Lena. You've been keeping your background quiet, he said. Lena's jaw tightened. It wasn't relevant. Keene's eyes softened slightly, not sentiment but understanding. It's relevant tonight. Lena didn't answer. Because the truth was a door she'd kept locked for a reason. And if it opened here, in the hospital that had treated her like a disposable employee, it wouldn't just change tonight. It would change everything. Pause. If you want the moment where a powerful authority walks in, asks one calm question, and suddenly the whole room has to face the truth. Subscribe now, because this story is about to turn in a way Darren Pike can't spin. Keene stayed in the ICU corridor, not hovering, not interfering, just present. Presence was its own pressure. Sloan spoke quietly with federal security. Dr. Huang returned to the ICU bay. Nurses moved with renewed focus, energized by the knowledge that what they did tonight would be examined at levels most hospitals never touched. And Darren Pike stood near the wall, jaw clenched, eyes darting like a man looking for an exit. Lena leaned against the counter for a moment, her hands finally feeling the delayed tremor of adrenaline release. She stared at her own fingers. Steady, always steady. She remembered a different kind of light, moonlight on dust, headlamps under canvas, the red glow of a tactical flashlight. Back then, she'd learned to put emotions in a box until later. But later always came. And it came now in the form of humiliation resurfacing. Security escort, glass walls, people watching her leave. The injustice wasn't gone just because she'd been useful. Keene stepped closer to her, voice quiet. You don't look surprised to see helicopters. Lena's eyes flicked up. I'm surprised they landed here. Keene nodded slowly. You knew what it meant. I knew it wasn't routine, Lena said. Keene studied her face. You've been living smaller than you are. Lena's lips pressed together. That's what keeps life simple. Keene's gaze shifted toward the ICU room again. Simple doesn't always serve. Before Lena could respond, Elise returned, breathless, carrying a folder like it weighed 100 pounds. She handed it to Keene with both hands. Keene opened it, scanning the pages. The corridor was silent except for monitor beeps and distant footsteps. Keene's brow lowered slightly. He looked at Darren Pike. This is thin, Keene said. Darren forced a polite smile. We followed appropriate process. There were behavioral concerns, issues with team cohesion. Keene flipped a page. No formal warnings, no documented clinical errors, no peer review. Darren's smile stiffened. Sometimes cultural fit is. Keene closed the folder slowly. And that's when the room changed again. Not with shouting, with the sudden certainty that Darren Pike's language had stopped working. Keene's voice stayed calm. Mr. Pike, do you know who Lena Hart is? Darren blinked. She's a PA formerly employed. Keene's eyes held him. That's all you bothered to learn. Darren's throat moved. We review credentials. Keene cut him off. You reviewed her as a line item. He turned to Lena. Ms. Hart, I'm going to ask you directly. Were you ever assigned to Joint Special Operations medical units? The question hit the air like a flare. Nurses paused mid-step. Sloane's head snapped toward Lena. Darren Pike's eyes widened, confusion turning quickly to alarm. Lena felt the old instinct, deny, deflect, minimize. But Keene wasn't asking to expose her. He was asking to confirm what he already knew. Yes, Lena said quietly. Keene nodded once, satisfied. Combat medic, later advanced clinical training, multiple deployments. Lena didn't correct him. Because if she corrected him, she'd have to say the words out loud. Special operations. The part of her life that didn't fit into the hospital's neat hierarchy. Darren Pike's face shifted into something like disbelief. That's irrelevant. This is a civilian hospital. Keene looked at him like Darren had spoken in a language that didn't apply to reality. It's relevant, Keene said, because you fired someone trained to make decisions under pressure when lives depend on minutes. Darren's voice rose slightly, panic pushing through polish. We have standards, we have liability concerns. Keene's tone stayed level. Your liability concern tonight was addressed by the same person you terminated. Darren's mouth opened, closed. Keene turned slightly, addressing the corridor, the staff, the witnesses. Let me be clear. Director Rourke's presence here tonight is not public information, but the fact that he survived because of timely clinical escalation will be documented. He looked back at Darren. And I will personally ensure that documentation includes why Ms. Hart was escorted out of this building earlier today. Darren's face went pale. Elise Monroe swallowed hard, eyes flicking between them. Lena stood still, feeling the strange disorientation of being seen too clearly. Keene stepped closer, voice softer now, meant only for Lena. You didn't come back here for vindication. You came back because you couldn't walk away. Lena's eyes stung unexpectedly, not from tears yet, but from the pressure behind them. I'm not built to walk away, she said. Keene nodded, I know. Pause. If that reveal just hit you the way it hit that hallway, if you felt the whole story reframe in one breath, go ahead and comment what you think Lena's next move should be. Should she stay and fight for her name here, or walk away with her dignity and let the truth chase her? Darren Pike didn't collapse into confession. People like Darren rarely did. Instead, he tried to regain control in the only way he knew, by narrowing the narrative. This is an employment matter, he said, voice tight. Admiral, with respect, the military doesn't dictate hospital HR. Keene nodded as if acknowledging a technicality. Correct, I don't dictate it. Then he looked at Sloane, Captain. Sloane stepped forward, Sir. Keene's voice remained calm. Initiate a formal incident report with federal oversight due to the involvement of Director Rourke. Include all relevant staff interactions, delays, and attempted obstructions. Sloane's eyes flicked toward Darren. Understood. Darren's face tightened. You can't. Keene held up a hand again. Darren stopped mid-sentence like a man hitting an invisible wall. Keene continued. Dr. Huang, I'd like your attending notes and your statement regarding Ms. Hart's clinical decisions yesterday and tonight. Huang nodded, voice firm. You'll have them. Keene looked at Elise. And HR will provide the complete chain of documentation regarding her termination. Elise nodded quickly. Yes. Darren's voice cracked slightly. This is excessive. Keene's eyes settled on him. What's excessive is firing competent clinicians for doing their job, then attempting to remove them during an emergency because it offends your sense of control. The words weren't loud. They were surgical. And Darren Pike, who had always used language as armor, had none left. Lena watched him carefully. Not with glee. With something colder, recognition. She recognized the type. Not evil, not dramatic. Just dangerous in the quiet way that gets people hurt while paperwork stays clean. Darren tried one more move, softer now. Lena, if you'll step aside, we can discuss reinstatement in a civilized manner. The audacity of it, reinstatement offered like a favor, made the anger flare behind Lena's ribs. But she didn't lash out. She looked at him, voice steady. You don't get to offer me dignity after you tried to strip it away. Darren's eyes narrowed. Be careful, you're still in this building. Lena nodded once, so are witnesses. Sloane's mouth twitched slightly, almost a smile. Keene glanced at Lena. Ms. Hart, do you have copies of your notes from yesterday's incident? Lena hesitated. I documented in the chart. Keene's gaze held hers. Do you have anything else? Lena understood what he was asking. Not retaliation. Receipts. Lena looked down at her hands, then toward the lobby in her mind, where her cardboard box sat abandoned in the rain. Inside that folder were copies, because she'd learned in systems that punished truth, you kept your own record. She'd printed her certification letters when she started. She dekept emails that felt off. She desaved a copy of the scheduled changes that piled onto her without explanation. Not to weaponize, to survive. Yes, Lena said quietly, in my personal belongings. Keene nodded. We'll retrieve them. Darren's voice rose again. That is confidential. Keene's gaze cut him off. Mr. Pike stopped talking. The corridor went still. Darren Pike's face flushed with humiliation, the same humiliation he'd engineered for Lena earlier. But unlike Lena, Darren didn't have discipline. He had entitlement. He turned sharply and walked away, coat swaying, the back of his neck red. Elise lingered, eyes flicking nervously. Lena watched Darren go, feeling no triumph yet. Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a process, and she knew Darren would fight. People like him always did. Pause. If you've ever watched someone weaponize professionalism to cover cruelty, you know exactly why this part matters. If that hits close to home, take a second to hit subscribe and share this story with someone who's been underestimated. Because what comes next is the kind of vindication that takes procedure, not luck. The next hour unfolded with the controlled intensity of an ICU night. Labs returning, medications adjusted, staff rotating in and out. Director Rourke remained sedated, stabilized, monitored by machines that spoke in beeps and numbers. Keene stayed nearby, never intrusive, always present. Sloane made calls, her voice low, precise, carrying the weight of official channels. Dr. Huang wrote notes with an expression like a man, finally letting himself acknowledge the rot he'd tolerated in his own institution. And Lena stood at the edge of it all, a strange in-between state. She wasn't staff. She wasn't exactly a visitor. She was the reason the room was still breathing. A nurse approached her quietly. It was Priya Desai, the young resident from yesterday. Her eyes were wide. Lena, they said you were fired. Lena nodded. I was. Priya swallowed. That's wrong. Everyone knows you saved him. Lena's voice softened slightly. Knowing and acting are different. Priya looked down, ashamed. I didn't say anything. Lena studied her face. Priya was young but not careless. She was scared. Lena placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. If you want to make it right, tell the truth when you're asked. That's enough. Priya's eyes glistened. She nodded. A few minutes later, 2 hospital security officers returned from the lobby carrying Lena's box, now wrapped in a plastic bag to shield it from rain. They set it down near her carefully, as if it contained something fragile. In a way, it did. Lena looked at the box, and for the first time since she'd left the conference room, her chest tightened painfully. Her plant was bent, her photos were damp at the corners. Her life reduced to cardboard again. Keene noticed. He stepped beside her. I'm sorry you were treated that way. Lena's voice was quiet. I'm used to being treated like I don't belong. Keene looked at her. You belong wherever competence matters. Lena let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but wasn't. Then I belong in very few places, she said. Keene didn't smile, but his tone warmed. That's about to change. A new figure arrived, an inspector-type, badge visible, suit slightly rumpled, eyes sharp. He introduced himself to Keene in low tones. They spoke for a moment, then the inspector turned toward Lena. Ms. Hart, he said, I'm conducting a preliminary review. I'll need your statement. Lena nodded once. Okay. They moved into a small consultation room near the ICU, a room with a table, 2 chairs, and fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. The inspector turned on a recorder. For the record, you understand this is a fictionalized scenario. Keene's eyes flicked to him. The inspector cleared his throat. Apologies, habit from media policy. Lena almost smiled. The inspector continued, please describe your termination. Lena spoke plainly, laying out facts without embellishment. The glass walls. The folder. The escort. The reason given, culture, tone, chain of command. Then he asked about tonight. Lena described the helicopters, the landing, the patient presentation, her clinical impressions, the steps she took. The inspector's pen moved quickly. When she finished, he leaned back slightly. You didn't hesitate to intervene despite being fired. Lena's eyes held steady. He was a patient. The inspector studied her, and you recognized him. Yes. Why? Lena paused, because his name appears in places most people don't read. Keen's gaze sharpened slightly. The inspector nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he could say. When the interview ended, Lena stood, feeling the weight of the night settle deeper into her bones. She picked up her box again. And that's when Keen spoke, voice quiet but firm. Ms. Hart, you're not walking home tonight. Lena blinked, I can. Keen shook his head. No, not after this. You'll have an escort, and tomorrow we'll address the rest. Lena looked down at the damp cardboard. A strange thought came to her. She'd been walking home alone, fired and invisible. And now 2 helicopters had landed, and the world had pivoted around her. Not because she demanded it. Because competence has a way of forcing reality into the open. Pause. If you're still here at this point, you're exactly the kind of person who understands that the best revenge isn't screaming. It's being undeniable. Hit like if you want more stories where dignity wins without becoming cruel. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean but tense, like it was waiting for the next sound. Lena didn't sleep much. Keen's team placed her in a nearby hotel, secure, quiet. She stared at the ceiling for hours, hearing echoes of rotor blades and Darren Pike's voice. You are out of your depth. She'd heard worse. But the injustice of it, the casualness, kept replaying. By mid-morning, she was back at Lakebridge Medical Center, not through the main entrance this time, but through a secured administrative corridor. She wore the same clothes, now dried, her hair pulled back tight. Her face looked tired, but her posture was straight. Keen met her near a conference room, larger than the one where she'd been fired. This one had a long table, leather chairs, a video screen on the wall. Inside sat Dr. Huang, Priya Desai, 2 nurses Lena recognized, Elise Monroe, an HR director, and Darren Pike. Darren looked composed again, but his eyes were red around the edges. He'd either slept poorly or cried. Lena suspected the former. Keen stood at the head of the table. This is a procedural review, he said calmly. We will address 2 matters. First, Director Rourke's emergency care pathway last night and any obstructions. Second, the termination of Ms. Hart and whether it was appropriate. Darren leaned forward slightly. Admiral, I must insist. Keen looked at him. Darren stopped. Keen gestured toward the HR director. Present the termination rationale. The HR director cleared his throat, reading from a document. Ms. Hart was terminated due to repeated concerns regarding communication style, failure to align with hospital culture, and escalation outside. Keen held up a hand. Evidence. The HR director blinked. We have feedback. Evidence, Keen repeated. The HR director's cheeks flushed. There are informal complaints. Keen turned to Dr. Huang. Clinical evaluation of her escalation yesterday. Huang spoke clearly. She identified a deteriorating patient and escalated appropriately. She likely prevented a critical event. Keen nodded. Witnesses. Priya's hands trembled slightly, but she spoke. I was there. She was right. The patient's signs were subtle. She noticed what others missed. One nurse added, Lena is always thorough. She's calm. She doesn't panic. Another said, she's tough but fair. She doesn't bully. Keen's gaze shifted to Darren. Mr. Pike, you said she was disruptive. Darren's jaw tightened. Her actions caused a VIP procedure to be delayed. The surgeon complained. The patient complained. It created a cascade. Keen nodded slowly. So the disruption was financial and reputational. Darren's eyes flashed. It was operational. Keene leaned forward slightly, voice still calm. A hospital exists to treat patients, not to preserve schedules. If schedules are your priority, you should work for an airline. The room went still. Elise Monroe stared at her hands. Darren's face reddened. Keene continued, now let's address last night. Ms. Hart was told to leave the building. Yet when Director Rourke arrived unstable, she intervened. Mr. Pike tempted to have her removed during the emergency. Darren stiffened. I was protecting the hospital from liability. Keene's eyes held him. Your protection nearly delayed care. Darren's voice rose. That's speculative. And in that moment, the same word Darren had used on Lena came back like a boomerang. Speculative. Keene's tone sharpened for the first time. No, it's documented. He gestured to Sloane, who stood near the door with a folder. She passed it to Keene. Keene opened it and read. Security statement, nurse statement, Dr. Huang statement, audio from corridor camera, time-stamped. Darren's eyes widened. He looked at Elise, then HR searching for rescue. No one moved. Keene closed the folder gently. Mr. Pike, your actions constitute interference with medical operations in an emergency involving a federal director. That triggers oversight beyond this hospital. Darren swallowed hard. Keene raised a hand. Stop. You will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending further investigation. Darren's face went gray. Elise whispered, Darren. Darren's eyes flicked to Lena, and for a second there was something like raw fear there. He'd built his power by making others feel small. Now he was the small one. Keene turned to Lena. Ms. Hart, your termination will be reversed effective immediately, full back pay, and a formal apology will be issued. Lena's throat tightened. Not because she wanted an apology, but because the universe rarely corrected itself this cleanly. She inhaled slowly. Thank you. Keene's eyes stayed on hers. You also have a choice. You can return, or you can leave with your record corrected. Lena looked around the room, faces that had watched her be escorted out, faces that now looked at her with a mix of shame and awe. And she realized something quietly devastating. Vindication didn't erase what happened. It only proved it shouldn't have happened. Pause. If you've ever dreamed of a moment where the truth is read out loud in the same room where you were dismissed, comment, I hear you. And if you want more long-form stories where the ending is earned through procedure and witness, subscribe. You'll feel the payoff every time. Lena didn't answer immediately. She stood, hands resting lightly on the edge of the conference table, feeling the weight of every second. Then she spoke, voice calm. I didn't come back for a job, she said. I came back because a patient needed help. Keene nodded once. Lena continued, I'll return under conditions. A ripple went through the room. Huang's eyes widened slightly. HR leaned forward, alert. Keene's gaze stayed steady. Name them. Lena's voice remained even. First, I want clinical escalation protected, no more punishing staff for advocating for patients. I want it written, enforced, and trained. HR swallowed, we can. Lena held up a hand slightly. Second, I want Darren Pike's pattern investigated beyond me. I'm not the only one he targeted. Talk to nurses, techs, anyone who got labeled difficult when they disagreed. Elise's face went pale. Keene's mouth tightened slightly, approving. Lena added, third, I want a peer review panel that includes frontline staff, not just executives. Accountability can't be optional. Silence. Then Dr. Huang spoke, voice firm. I support that. A nurse nodded, me too. Priya whispered, yes. Keene looked at HR, make it happen. HR nodded quickly, scribbling notes. Lena finally sat back, her heart still steady but something in her chest easing. She looked at Keene, and one more thing. Keene's eyes lifted, yes. Lena's voice softened slightly. I want my name cleared publicly inside this institution, not rumor correction, not private emails, public. Keene nodded, agreed. The meeting ended with signatures, statements, and the quiet crack of a system being forced to acknowledge its own corruption. As people filed out, Darren Pike remained seated, stunned, as if he couldn't process a world where his words didn't define reality. Keene paused near the door, looking back at Lena. "You did well," he said. Lena's eyes held his. "I did what I was trained to do." Keene nodded, "Exactly." And then he left, his presence lingering like a line drawn in ink. Later that afternoon, Lena walked through the hospital lobby. The same lobby where she'd been escorted out. This time she walked alone, carrying nothing. Her box sat in her car now, dry and safe. People looked up as she passed. Some looked away, embarrassed. Some nodded, tentative respect. One nurse stopped her near the elevators. "I'm sorry," the nurse said quietly. "I saw what happened yesterday." Lena studied her face. "Thank you." The nurse hesitated. "Are you okay?" Lena paused. And in that pause, the story's final shape began to form. Because the title wasn't just about helicopters. It was about what happened when Lena was at her lowest, walking home red and humiliated, and the world dropped a crisis at her feet that forced everyone to see who she really was. Lena answered honestly, "I will be." The nurse nodded, eyes shining. As Lena stepped into the elevator, she heard a distant sound outside, faint, almost imagined. A helicopter passing overhead. Not landing, just moving on. And Lena realized, with a quiet sense of closure, that she didn't need helicopters to validate her. She needed a system that couldn't punish integrity. And if she could help build that, maybe this place could become something worth belonging to. Pause. If you want to keep walking with characters like Lena, people who stay professional when they're wronged, and let competence do the talking, hit subscribe and then watch the next story on the channel. The next one will give you that same slow-burn justice with a brand new twist. That evening, as the sun finally broke through the clouds and turned the hospital windows into sheets of gold, Lena walked out of Lakebridge Medical Center again. But this time, she wasn't walking home because she had nowhere else to go. She was walking out because her shift was done. Because the patient was stable. Because the paperwork was in motion. And because her dignity, once dragged through glass walls, had been lifted back into the light where it belonged. At the curb, a black SUV waited. Sloan stood by it, raincoat folded over her arm. She gave Lena a crisp nod, "Ms. Hart." Lena nodded back, "Captain." Sloan hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Director Rourke asked about you when he woke up." Lena's chest tightened. "What did he say?" Sloan's mouth twitched slightly. "He said, the calm one, the one who didn't flinch." Lena let out a breath. Sloan added, "He also said you reminded him of someone he trusted once." Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who?" Sloan looked at her carefully. "He didn't say, but Admiral Keene did." Lena's pulse slowed, attentive. Sloan's voice lowered. "Keene said you were on a team under his oversight years ago. He said you saved people who never got thanked." Lena looked away, eyes on the streetlights coming on, one by one. "Most of them couldn't thank anyone," she said. Sloan didn't press. Instead, she opened the SUV door. "Ride." Lena shook her head gently. "Not tonight." Sloan studied her. "You sure?" Lena nodded. "I want to walk." Sloan stepped back, "Then walk." Lena turned toward the sidewalk. As she took her first steps, she heard a sound behind her, not rotors this time. Footsteps. She glanced back. Dr. Wong had come out of the hospital, hands in his pockets, face tired but sincere. He walked a few paces behind her like he wasn't sure he had the right. "Lena," he called softly. She stopped, turned. "I owe you an apology," he said. Lena tilted her head slightly. "For what?" "For not stopping it yesterday," Huang said. "For letting Darren run this place like a brand instead of a hospital." Lena held his gaze. "You stopped him today." Huang nodded, swallowing. "Because you made it impossible not to see." Lena's voice softened. "That's how change happens sometimes." Huang looked down, then back up. "Are you really coming back?" Lena nodded once. "Yes, under conditions." A faint smile flickered. "Good." Lena turned and continued walking, the city air cool and clean now, her cardigan still damp at the cuffs. And as she walked, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not revenge, peace. Because justice had come, not as a fantasy, but as a chain of witnesses, documentation, and authority that cared about truth. And the helicopters, they de-landed at the exact moment she thought her life was shrinking, only to prove it was about to expand. Pause. Before you go, if this ending gave you that quiet, warm kind of vindication, the kind that doesn't turn the hero bitter, hit like and tell me in the comments where you think Lena's strength really came from. Her training, her integrity, or her refusal to walk away.